There are many pathways to take in the quest to become a more resilient people. We are seeking to build our resilience through the pathway of family. Nature can teach us much concerning our capacity to regenerate. Africa has several species known for their remarkable capacity to regenerate lost limbs. The salamander is particularly interesting because of its ability to regenerate not only limbs but eyes, brains, and parts of their spine. They heal without scarring. I want to propose that culture regeneration, and more importantly, the regeneration of African thinking, is still possible. Slow maybe, but possible absolutely, if family can be equipped to do so. We find ourselves in 2024 a people caught in the confluence of multiple traumas. We are scarred collectively, intergenerationally, systemically. All of that now confronts us in our present. What are the possibilities of healing ourselves, especially when we are still trying to recognize the intersectionality of our trauma? To build our resilience through the family as a pathway first requires us to understand what the institution of family as a socialization system has been damaged. In pre-colonial Africa, family was an extension of the greater community with a deeply ingrained sense of care for its members. There was contribution by all to the collective well-being of our people. The gradual and continuous journey into so-called modernization has been altering the definition and functions of family. Do questions of the purpose of a family still concern us? Or does it seem to us not sophisticated enough to be a solution? As a people, are we not drifting further and further away from ourselves? When we walk away from the foundations of that which made us a people, it seems today we are being held together by the need to survive financially as families rather than the need to remain a people. The profile of many families is they are known for either their economic status or their faith. What does that mean in terms of how we have socialized our people in this quest for modernization? Family was a school of life preparedness. It was the school of mankind. Essential social and economic skills were taught practically. Moral guidance and community bonding were provided, and the knowledge of what being an African meant was very, very clear. The child was raised by the village that we all know, but not the global village of strangers. The syllabus was the same, and because of that, the communities were African branded. There was no other way of life. Family was the primary institution for cultural transmission. The design of the settlements were very intentional. Settlements were fortified, enclosed spaces to prevent the infiltration into communities of unknown persons. This protected external cultural influences. It also protected the community and their way of life. How do we transpose that in 2024? Perhaps to answer that, we may need to ask the question, what is the African way of life? What are we trying to fortify ourselves against? My humble observation is we have no real common and shared answer on what it means to be an African people. We cannot be bound together by physical proximity without the cultural connectedness. The design of pre-colonial settlement reinforced social boundaries in relationships, providing a sense of identity and belonging. How are we designing our living spaces today? The family's task today is to find out how to stay culturally connected whilst living in an era where we are highly accessible. In the pre-colonial era, families had institutionalized continuity. The walled cities, enclosed spaces, the kraals, meant that no one could just walk into our living spaces. We were free, but difficult to access from outside. Now we are open to almost everyone and everything. Under that fortified system, the family held its fort as the primary institution of learning. In 2024, the design of our family lives has been subcontracted to formal education system, the church, and the internet. They are now the primary institutions of learning. Where have we been compromised in our resilience infrastructure? May I humbly suggest that it is the breakdown of the settlement system. It's this living with strangers, more so strangers in our minds, that has weakened our resilience. May I suggest that the breaking down of our fortified living spaces was by colonial design. When you have broken settlement, a people are no longer fortified. When a people are no longer fortified, the traditional education system gets dismantled. When the traditional education system of a people gets dismantled, people lose their essence. And when people lose their essence, they become shattered. And when they become shattered, their minds are broken. And when their minds are broken, what do they have? And so we find ourselves flocking to the cities to live in tiny spaces on top of each other. Yet our homes have vast spaces. Why? What were we taught that made us trade our education and despise living within our rural communities? Could it be that colonialism inflicted us with the loss of capacity for self-determination? In my humble observation, we seem to see our worth in terms of Western values. If we were to attempt to measure ourselves against ourselves, what would be the yardstick? What would we use to say, yes, we are a people? Where was the family as a socialization system dismantled? May I suggest that it is the death of that which made us know ourselves that has brought us to the state of weakness. We no longer know how to be ourselves. We have birthed children in our partial confusion, and because of our disconnectedness, those of us who are consciously trying to raise culturally grounded, skilled, and morally anchored, economically competent children are mostly doing so as individuals. Is it possible to reinstill our culture single-handedly? We used to be a people who sat by the fire to have conversations about being a people. Now we are glued to phone screens. We send emojis. Do we not need, firstly, as individuals, to have internal dialogue, to establish within ourselves as individual families, whether, in all honesty, it is still important for us to be Africans, or we are good with just being human. Is it not mission critical for our resilience that we learn to be ourselves, to think like ourselves, to teach like ourselves? Family has relegated the bulk of the socialization responsibility to education systems and churches, to schools that largely give us abstract knowledge and certificates. And yet our children remain economic minors well into their 40s, if not their 50s now. African traditional education was practical and integrated with very specific profile output of what a resilient person would look like. They would have demonstrated economic capacity, skills, and social character. Our modern education system waffles on the resilience of its graduates, but the African parent still pays fees faithfully. In the context of colonialism, this abstract knowledge system had to take shape. It was critical to destroy the cultural education in order for cultural imperialism to be successful. And it is a resounding success. Our education system made us, and therefore to reconstruct ourselves, to achieve cultural regeneration. Our education is the key. But to reconstruct it, we need to know how we were broken. An extract from British Member of Parliament in 1835, Lord Babington Macaulay speech to the British Parliament shared some fundamental insights into how a people's mind gets broken collectively. Though he had no direct involvement in the colonialization of Africa, his strategy served as a framework for colonizing Africa. He specialized in India. In short, the method goes: to break a people, it is important to get them to believe with all their heart that there is no knowledge apart from colonial knowledge. Everything they know, from food, dress, values, lifestyle, image, hair, skin, faith, their very way of life, all of it is wrong. And when you get to that conviction that everything about you is wrong, who are you? It has been suggested by other critical thinkers that for the family institution to be successful as a pathway to strengthen our resilience, there is need to recapture and nurture the fundamentals of African society and culture. We are deeply engineered for self-hatred. We will therefore destroy each other by default. We have nations with tenants, not citizens. It is common knowledge that in the hierarchy of social units, the individual is the smallest. So long as we as individuals do not see our relatedness across society, as a people we are at our lowest, weakest in terms of resilience. Learning to be modern without losing ourselves as family is one of our greatest challenges. How do we arrive at such a place? How do we arrive at a place where cultural re-engineering becomes important? If we can get to this place, it means that we have a stepping stone on which we can start, even as individual families, to consciously learn together with our children to become African people. Our conversation so far brings us to a place of an appreciation of how we are the way we are. But this does not necessarily translate to the desire to become authentically African. It is also possibly true that we have totally fallen in love with our imperialized identity. For family as a socialization system to be correctly reinstituted as the educator of our people, the desire to love ourselves as African people needs to genuinely seize us. Learning to adjust without losing ourselves, to redefine African modernization in a way that reconnects us as a people, may I suggest, will become the real turning point for families to educate their children and themselves to become a more resilient people. Thank you for listening. Join us again as we continue our journey to changing the narratives of Africa. Your host, Nyere Dubar.